From the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, this is Indiana Issues. Here's your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz.
And welcome to Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Well, we had a primary in Indiana this week. Also, protests and riots in the streets of downtown Indianapolis. So we got a lot of things to get to. And join us today will be our good friends Mark Rutherford, Libertarian, Democrat Lara Beck, and Republican conservative Cam Carter. So, Mark, we'll go ahead and start with you. First, we had Indiana's primary this week. All eyes on CD5, where Republican State Senator Victoria Spartz will meet up and go against Christina Hale, former Lieutenant Governor candidate. Both Hale and Spartz got about 40% of the vote. Your reaction to what happened in the 5th Congressional District, my friend?
Well, I'm a little surprised that Spartz did as well as she did, although I'm not surprised she won. She's very calls herself a fiscal conservative. The northern part of the district, very much a fiscal conservative. The southern part of the district, 5th District, Congressional District, which is Upper Marion County and Lower Hamilton County, is becoming less and less as fiscal conservative, used by the Republicans in that area for years and years. The Hamilton County Council race there showed that it's going from the more rural conservative base to a more urban conservative base. And I think that helped Hale a little bit in her race because it's a changing area. And Spartz, though, did a really good job. She was well-funded, a lot of it by herself, but that's what matters. And her mailings were great. I received lots of them, a lot of people talking about her. And you just got to say she did a good job getting the word out and saying that people should vote for me.
Let me get your thoughts on it, Laura, on the Republican side. We'll get to the Democrat side in just a second. But your thoughts on how Victoria Spartz won about 40% of the vote in that race of 16 people. Oops, Laura, you with us?
Oh, I am. I'm sorry. I thought you were getting the Republican side first. I apologize. Did you confuse me for a Republican? Is that what you're doing today? Sorry about that.
No problem. Your thoughts on how Victoria Spartz did?
I think it was a really fascinating election to watch, particularly because she really ran some very conservative ads. She's going to stand with Donald Trump. So I think it's going to be really tough for her in a general election to tack moderate. And then when you've got that background behind you. So it was fascinating because there were so many people running. There were so many ads. It was hard to cut through the clutter. But I think in this case, having the money that she had really, really helped her quite a bit.
Let's jump over to our good friend Cam Carter. Cam, your thoughts on Victoria Spartz and how well she did in that race in the primary this past week?
Yeah, I like Laura and Mark are a little surprised by the margin of victory there, given that balkanized field. I certainly thought that, Kelly Mitchell and Carl Brizzi with name ID would do a little bit better, but probably helps to have $500,000 from the Dave McIntosh group in Washington D.C., the Club for Growth, back in your play, and then you could have substantial financial resources of your own to put into the race. So, congratulations to Senator Spartz on her victory. Now I think the hard work begins, particularly with this changing district in the 5th. I really view it in the fall as a real bellwether as to what's going to be going on, both in the state, in the suburbs and exurbs around the country potentially.
Laura, let me get you on that Club for Growth part, because the Club for Growth spent about $400,000 beating up on Carl Brizzi, beating up on Beth Henderson. What does that tell you? What does that mean?
Well, I think it means that they recognize, and I agree with Cam, that this is really going to be one of the most watched races nationally. I mean, if not the most watched congressional race. I think that they really need to protect their flank, and I think they're very concerned, which is why they're willing to put money behind it. I also think that they've got to line up as many Trump Republicans as they possibly can. So I think for her in a general election, a lot of what she said and did during the primary it's going to really be hard to come back on. Another piece that I think that also will be interesting with this is one of those districts that is, for Democrats, very winnable. Joe Donnelly won this district in 2018. And as the suburbs and as these communities outside of the larger cities are really changing, especially in terms of how they vote, I think I think this is a very winnable one for us, especially because we have a great candidate in Christina Hale. The second part is that this is part of Sherry Bustos, who's the head of the DCCC. This is part of her strategy to flip these districts, like a district like this, these suburban districts, to flip them. And because she is from the Midwest, I think we're going to see some much more practical and pragmatic campaign approaches that we would see on the coast, for example.
Let me get you, Mark, on that one, because the DCCC's obviously got their sights set on this. What does this mean, particularly for Christina Hale?
Well, I think the district's in play with Christina Hale. I made the comment earlier that the southern part's more urban conservative. If she runs more a little bit conservative, but the way she has run in the past, I think she'll be very popular in northern Marion County and southern Hamilton County. I live in southern Hamilton County, and I see it changing. I grew up there, and it's a different area than it used to be. Northern Hamilton County, the rural district counties, Madison County, those areas in the northern part of the district still have a very strong, I call it rural conservative, is the best way I can describe it. They're going to be more in line with Sparks. Hale's going to have a lot to work there. But if she does okay up there and does really well down in Marion County and southern Hamilton County, she could win.
And Cam, let me get you in that, because the big question is obviously, is the 5th District, is it maybe not as red as it used to be, but it's also not blue? Is it purple? Is it burgundy? Is it pink? What color would you describe the 5th District as?
I'm sure there's a Pantone number for it that I can't remember right now, but it is red with a purplish hue. I think in this 2020 election, it may come down to, obviously, who gets your vote out, but how do you do that? Well, you target your voters first, and whoever has the best digital campaign in this election, in this district, is probably going to end up the winner. I would not underestimate Christina Hale. She's been a fundraising juggernaut. The district is trending more to the purple, and both candidates at this point have served in the Indiana General Assembly and have voting records to defend, in addition to whatever ads they have run to date, whatever public persona or brand they've been able to create. And it will be really, really interesting to watch, but I think it's going to come down to the digital strategy for both campaigns.
Our guests today are Democrat Lara Beck, Republican Cam Carter, Libertarian Mark Rutherford. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. You're watching Indiana Issues, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Folks, want to change gears a little bit, also talk about another primary incident we had. Some people in Marion County were lined up for like 3 hours or so after the polls had closed on Tuesday. Marion County Republican Chairwoman Sandy Kirkhofer, also a state representative, said she believed that mail-in ballots were a complete failure, at least in Marion County. Ballots were still being counted on Friday as we record this program. Lara, let me start with you. What's going on in Marion County?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people would want me to mute myself for this this response. Look, I think that Clerk Eldridge, Mila Eldridge and her team did a really good job under the circumstances that they had. A couple things I think that are really important to highlight. First of all, in April, they asked if they could go to a vote by mail piece. That was something that people wanted to do. Folks are nervous about coming out to vote because we are in the middle of a global pandemic. When you live in a county where we had been on stay-at-home orders for a number of periods of time, a lot of people by that point in time were really concerned about how they were going to vote. So the clerk rightly asked to vote by mail. She was denied that ability to vote by mail. 124,000 people requested absentee ballots. And if you are, that is a sign that in Marion County, there is a force of people who want to vote. 124,000 people. That's pretty impressive, especially in a primary. So you have that in play and all as well. And then you also have the state Republicans at the General Assembly who want to be the city county council, apparently, for Marion County, because they don't like government overreach unless it involves the state's largest Democrat county. They're dictating how the count is run. And then you also add to the mix, the county clerk the Republican county chair is complaining that this election was a failure. Well, she has a member on the Marion County Election Board that agreed to go around and do it this way. So they also typically do not staff and fully staff and provide the volunteers that are needed for the count. Then you add the Republican Secretary of State to the mix, telling the clerk to do her job. So I think that it went as well as it could go. I think the clerk did a very good job. I think the clerk's team did an excellent job. And I think voting by mail is actually successful. And it is just a propaganda tool to try and prop up and perpetuate the Trump narrative that voting by mail is not successful when most of the people on his team are voting by mail. So you can mute me now, Abdul. You can mute me now.
Of course, we love everybody's voices. Cam, let me get your response to that.
Look, I've been in politics too long to know that if it had been a Republican clerk, the Democrats would be throwing stones. If it had been a Libertarian clerk, Mark, both parties would be throwing stones. Anytime you have a disruption like the pandemic and you have this hybrid system of voting in person, which is the default, or seeking mail-in or absentee balloting, and you have a huge influx of those absentee mail-ins, you are going to have complications. There are security issues. Could it probably have been handled better? Yeah, probably so. But I think in my own personal experience and observations, it's taking longer. You should have expected that. They should have planned for that, and hopefully they did. And I'm not too concerned about the finger pointing here. I'm more concerned about ballot integrity and ballot security and being able to conduct this appropriately across the board, not only in Marion County, but in the state and in the country come this fall. Let's apply lessons learned and plan ahead, because I think that's only prudent.
Mark, let me get your thoughts in here on how you think voting went here in Marion County in particular.
Oh, it in many regards is very painful, but there's been massive change required. And I've had an experience with the Libertarian National Committee's Libertarian Party's presidential nomination, which we just conducted. And I'm in the middle of the sausage making. It was awful. It actually went quite well, to my surprise, for the first time, to do it completely online. And the reason I'm saying that is we're looking at changes about how people expect things to be done. More and more people want to do mail-in. People are talking about doing things online that used to be in person. There's many ways to do elections, and modernization and change is always tough no matter who you are. I think it's part of the human condition. We get used to the way things are going. And I have sometimes been like, I don't want to do it. And then after I think about it, I go, it's just because I don't want to learn a new way. It probably is a better way. What I look for, and I agree with what Cam is saying, is will there be lessons learned? Will the general election go better? Will there be adequate? Actually, the most important thing is, can people trust the election? Will election security be good? Will it be reliable? Will people go and look at it and say, yeah, the line wasn't 3 hours this time, it was an hour. That's better. And I trust my vote got counted. That's what matters in the end of the day. And that as they do new things and try new things, it gets better and better quickly after each election.
Laura, we got about a minute or so before we take a quick break here, but I want to get your thoughts on this. You said about 123,000 people requested mail-in ballots. Here's $1 million question. That's only about 25% of the entire vote. So was that really a mandate, so to speak? Particularly, we've seen how in primaries you get anywhere between 20% to 40%.
Well, I think that I want to echo it. I really appreciate that Mark and Cam are so measured and so thoughtful in their responses. And I think their views are the kind of bipartisan views that we need to be running our elections and to be doing them as well as possible. I think that because we are in a global pandemic, that we are going to see more people who want to vote absentee and who are going to want to vote by mail. I did for the first time, I think, since college, voted absentee. So I think we're going to see that. I think the clerk's office is going to be prepared for that. I do think that there is a bit of the county chair on the Republican side opens herself up, and she opens up the party for criticism when you talk about how it has been an abject failure, because part of the 5th district, which was one of the most contested and most watched races, is in Marion County, and there were Republicans voting in that. And so that opens up the door for somebody who perhaps didn't win to have questions about how that process went. So I think you got to be really careful when you go out and attack the member of the other party in a global pandemic, because you have people who are going to be affected just like everyone else is.
Our guests today are our good friends, Democrat Lara Beck, Republican Cam Carter, Libertarian Mark Rutherford. We're going to take ourselves a quick break. We come back, some new polling numbers out in the race. We'll take a look at that. And also, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk about, like I said, lots of new poll numbers all over the place, and also the Attorney General's race as well. We'll be right back. You're watching Indiana Issues. And welcome back to Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Well, this week saw numerous protests and riots in Indianapolis, and while most of the protests were peaceful, there was some early rioting in the first couple of days. Protesters were showing their displeasures at the death of George Floyd, who was killed by police in Minneapolis. One officer has been charged with second-degree murder. 3 others also charged as well. Mark, we'll start with you. And these protests that we saw this week in Indianapolis, what message are these protesters trying to get out?
Well, some of the protesters are getting out the appropriate message, and the appropriate message is we've got some things out there that concern them. There's a growing concern about overcriminalization, about the militarization of police departments. A lot of people concerned that if you dress for a riot is created. Those are things that concern libertarians on that. People should be able to peacefully gather, express they're not happy, and go from there. The purpose of the police is whenever you get a huge group, it just takes 1 or 2 people who are there for inappropriate reasons to create a situation. And I'm looking about how the police handle those 1 or 2, and they create, in too many instances, a big problem. In other instances, and I observed this in Indianapolis the first night of everything, I was wondering, you've got some people who are doing it fine and are fine, but you've got other people who look like they're just doing it to loot. Why aren't you protecting the small business owners? They just got hammered and hammered hard. And so it's like anything. There's no perfect way to do it. I wasn't the police to do it, but I do know that based on complaints of libertarians over the last 20, 30, 40 years, this was kind of what was brewing and would happen in this situation. The other thing is, and Reason Magazine talked about it in end of March, Reason's a libertarian foundation, libertarian magazine and think tank, that they were very worried that when you've got 20% unemployment all of a sudden, if you go out there and you've got a lot of young people and they have nothing to do, it tends over history. And if you look at history, even recent history, that tends to be a situation where if some incident gets people upset, you're going to have looting and riots, and people need to be ready for that. Not I'll go into the pandemic later and the reaction to it, but that is something that happens, whether that was the right thing to do, what the governors did or not. That should have been ready and prepared for it. That's common knowledge that it's very easy for these things to go like this when all of a sudden you have lots of unemployed youth.
Lara, let me get your thoughts on this, because one of the things that struck me as odd was the Friday night before. We had some trouble, had some issues, and everybody gets that. But it was the Saturday night, particularly the protests were fine, but that Saturday night riots is when things got really out of control. What happened, do you think?
Well, I don't know what happened. All I can say is that we are at a place in our history and in our society where we have to make some major changes, and it's incumbent upon all of us to make those changes. Someone who is much smarter than me said to me the other day, when we know better, we do better. And I think a lot of us have to learn, have to listen, have to educate ourselves. Mark has some really great points about paramilitarization and what that can do in a protest and in a peaceful protest situation. Yeah, there were some folks down there who came down to loot, and it was incredibly hard, and it was incredibly sad to sit and to watch that unfold. But at the same time, what it is doing is it is forcing all of us to have some really difficult conversations and to look inward at ourselves and to see how we're living our lives, the things we say, the way we live them, the things we do. And I think it's a really important time for us to do all of that. I also think that for many of us as well, we are living in a world where everything is televised, where everyone has a phone, where everyone has a camera, where everyone can, in a blink of an eye, upload video to the internet and it can be seen by massive amounts of people, which is what happened with George Floyd. And that also is really changing. It's changing the paradigm. It's changing the dynamic. This isn't new. It's just that we're finally seeing it. So there's a lot that we have to do and a lot of work we have to do. And I hope that everyone's willing to do that.
Kim, let me get your thoughts in here about the riots, about the protests, and also how do you rate the performance of law enforcement, the governor, and the mayor in all this?
Well, let's just say that potential energy became kinetic under pressure. I think the pressure of the pandemic, I think the voices of discontent and concern, particularly amongst community of colors over decades, despite our societies and our government and our laws' best intentions, have failed them. And you have to differentiate between those voices of legitimate protest and exercise of First Amendment rights and people that are just out to create some degree of havoc or loot. And I believe fervently that there are many sinister forces at work in our body politic that are acting as agent provocateurs instead of peacemakers, and that has to be changed. I think the city administration could have done a lot better. I think during those riots and the protests and the attempt to engage in crowd control, enforce curfew, we saw abuses even with IMPD. I think Governor Holcomb prudently called out the National Guard. I'd be curious as to what his thoughts were on that call with President Trump about the Insurrection Act and whether he supports that call or not. One would hope not. But we've got a lot of reforms to take place, and I think they can begin at the core with having the conversation that Laura's talking about having a focus on the innocent citizen caught up in all of this, the small business owner that Mark cites. And we might want to, for you lawyers on this, talk about qualified immunity and that doctrine and how our police forces writ large across the country can act with a great degree of impunity because of that and the unionization and the militarization of those police forces.
We've got just a few minutes left here, so I want to jump to our fourth topic. The new poll numbers out in the race for governor as well as the race for attorney general. Let's go ahead and, Jacob, if we could, and start throwing these up here. Then we get our panel's response. In the favorable, unfavorable, Eric Holcomb, 72-15. You can see Mike Pence, 51-44. Donald Trump, 49-48. And Dr. Woody Myers, a Democratic candidate for governor, 13-5. In the governor's personal ratings, his job pool rating, 79%. COVID-19 rating 83%, and amongst all voters, his approval rating is 64, and Dr. Woody Myers is 31. In the Attorney General's race, favorable, unfavorable, Curtis Hill is 16-19. In a head-to-head match, according to the Republicans, he was 32-39 against Jonathan Weinzapfel. However, another poll put out there by Karen Talian, let's go ahead and throw that up there if we could. All right. If we did, hers was 32, 30, they're both tied at 36 apiece and 28% undecided. Like I said, we got just a few minutes left here, so Laura, we'll start with you. Threw a lot of numbers at you. What'd you think?
I think a poll is a snapshot in time. And I think that it's not surprising that Governor Holcomb, I'm just looking at the polling numbers right now that you had shared with us. I'm not surprised that he is doing as well as he is. He has had the bully pulpit, particularly with COVID and his leadership on the COVID response. So he definitely has boosted his name ID for the state. I'm also not surprised that that those are high. I do think that he's entering into some uncharted territory as we head into the next few months, because those reopening plans are really going to be standing to the test in case cases spike, as well as his response of how he is handling the unrest and the protests. I mean, he's been asked every day what his to-do list is in terms of equity and equality, and he hasn't been able to share with what that is. So that can become an issue as we're moving down the pike. I will say on the Attorney General's race, those numbers don't surprise me at all, especially on the head-to-head with Weinzapfel and Curtis Hill. The one thing I am a little bit surprised about is the Trump numbers. I was surprised they are where they are right now.
Mark, let me get your thoughts on these poll numbers. What do you think they mean?
Well, first of all, I noticed that no one still knows who the Attorney General is. And the reason I say that is the favorables, not very many people even know who it is. It's always the problem with those other races, statewide races. People really focus on who's running for governor. But that's by convention on who's selected. That's a different animal. Republicans have to deal with that and get through that. When it comes to Holcomb, a lot of favorables, but people who are involved in dealing with crises, they tend to get high numbers at first. The question to me is what happens in the next 3 or 4 months? The way I'm looking at this, really what's happening with the government shutdown that has happened, the COVID-19, the protests, et cetera, we won't see the true effects until elections that are 2, 3, 4 elections from now, is my guess. These favorables tell you how people are reacting right now to what's happening now. I want to see how they trend and what they do and where they're at over a period of time. I've got to tell you that 15% who aren't happy with Holcomb, they're more than unhappy with Holcomb. They don't like Holcomb, and they're interested and active in trying to make sure that he's not governor. The problem is there's no one to run in a primary because the things that make them angry at him happen after he was the only person who signed up successfully for the Republicans for the primary.
Cam, let me get your thoughts. We got about a minute or so left here in this segment. Your thoughts on what these numbers and what they mean for right now.
Well, polls are a snapshot in time, so I don't care about the Attorney General numbers at all because the Attorney General opponent name might not be Hill, and we don't know if it's going to be Weinzapfel or Talley. I think the numbers are very strong and indicative of widespread support for Governor Holcomb. It does depend on leadership going forward, but independents decide general elections. Independent-minded voters that think for themselves and decide between candidates versus a red versus blue dynamic in the main. So I think they're very good for the governor's reelection chances. They're probably daunting for Woody Myers on the Democratic side of that race. Remains to be seen in the Attorney General's race. And I, too, am dismayed by the level of support for Donald Trump in those numbers today.
All right. We're down to our last segment, our predictions and prognostications, where we ask our political friends to look in the crystal balls, tell us what they see and what's popping up there. So, Cam, we'll start with you.
One hell of a ride. I mean, I can't really, it's going to be the most unique election that I think any of us have ever experienced in our lifetimes. I pray fervently that it goes well and that victories by all parties are decisive.
Right.
So we don't get into a 2000 situation where things can be plausibly contested, particularly in the presidential race.
Laura, what do you see in that crystal ball of yours?
Oh boy, I'm hour by hour at this point, Abdul. I'm not even day by day. I agree with Cam. I mean, I think it is going to be one heck of a ride. The other piece I think as well is that what we're also going to see too is I think talking a little bit about state house races, the Democrat women did really well in the primaries, and they did really well last cycle around, especially in the state house races. So I think we're going to see a little bit more of that moving forward. And I also think that Christina Hale is going to do very well coming into the 5th.
Right. Mr. Rutherford, give you the last word, my friend.
Yes, I'm with Cam. I hope that there are decisive victories out there. This is not be a bad time to have a lot of disputes on it, but it may actually happen because everybody's all over the place on this, and everybody's got different types of things that they're concerned about. What I do think, and my prediction will be, and I have this feeling, and my observation and looking at everything, is this last 3 months, the protests, the government shutdowns, et cetera, is going to have effects that go through at least our next municipal elections. And it's going to be, we're in for a long ride politically, and it's going to change daily. I'll change my mind every day from now until at least 2023.
All right. Well, our guests today have been Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Lara Beck, and Republican Cam Carter. Thank you all very much for being with us. And from all of us here at Indiana Issues, thank you very much. We'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.